standing on the exposed concrete slab of the 24th floor. The wind off Elliott Bay cuts right through my safety jacket. It is a classic Seattle afternoon, gray, relentless, as soaking wet. The construction site is loud. Jackhammers are tearing up the pavement below, and the crane gears are grinding overhead, but strangely, this is the only place where I can hear myself think. There is a specific science to concrete. Once it cures, it is permanent. You cannot talk it into changing its shape. You cannot manipulate it with tears, guilt trips, or family loyalty. It is exactly what it is. I wish my family had been made of concrete. Instead, they were made of cheap drywall and expensive paint. They were all facade. For 28 years, I was the unseen support beam in the crumbling structure of the Vance family. I was Alara, the sensible one, the reliable one. I was the person you called when the basement flooded, not the person you invited to the champagne toast on the roof deck. That role was reserved for my brother, Julian. Julian was the golden child, the visionary, the erratic genius who could sell ice to an Eskimo but couldn't remember to pay his electric bill. My parents, Robert and Catherine, treated his incompetence like eccentricity and my competence like a servitude contract. They thought I existed to keep his foundation from cracking. They thought I was just the mortar, invisible, silent, and permanent. But here is the thing about architecture. If you ignore the load-bearing walls long enough, the whole house comes down. They didn't see it coming. They thought today was going to be their coronation. They thought they were signing a lease that would secure Julian's legacy forever. Instead, they walked into a demolition zone. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just pulled the pin and let gravity do the rest. In the architectural world of Seattle, there is a term for people like me. The ghost. We are the ones who stay until 2 a.m., our eyes burning from the glow of AutoCAD screens, obsessing over the load distribution of a cantilevered balcony or the thermal efficiency of a glass curtain whorl. We are the ones who solve the impossible structural riddles that the senior partners sell to the clients over 3 martini lunches. My name is on the payroll at Sterling & Haas, one of the most prestigious firms in the Pacific Northwest. But my name is rarely on the blueprints. Take the Rainier Spire, for example. It's a 40-story residential tower that just broke ground in Belltown. It has a twisting organic facade that mimics the flow of rainwater. The critics are calling it a masterpiece of modern fluidity. My boss, Mr. Sterling, accepted the Golden T-Square Award for the design last month. I was there, standing in the back of the banquet hall near the kitchen doors, holding his trench coat while he gave a speech about his sudden strike of inspiration. The truth, the inspiration wasn't his. It came to me at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday while I was staring at water running down my apartment window. I drew every line of that building. I calculated the wind shear. I selected the sustainable materials. But when I told my mother, Catherine, about the project, she didn't ask about the design. She didn't ask how it felt to change the skyline of a major American city. She said, "That's nice, Ellara, but don't work too hard. You know Julian is flying in next week, and he's gonna need you to pick him up from SeaTac. He's bringing a lot of equipment for his new venture." That was the dynamic. I was the scenery. Julian was the protagonist. Julian is 5 years older than me. He is handsome in that disheveled tech billionaire way, always wearing expensive hoodies and speaking in buzzwords. He has charisma. That's what my father, Robert, always says. Julian has the spark, Alara. You have the discipline. Every genius needs a manager. If Julian was a genius, his medium was failure. First, there was the artisanal coffee app that was supposed to disrupt Starbucks. My parents poured $50,000 into that. It failed because Julian forgot to secure vendor contracts. Then, there was the bespoke crypto mining venture. That cost my parents a second mortgage on their vacation home in Lake Chelan. It failed because Julian got bored and moved to Bali for a month. Spiritual reset. Throughout all of this, I was the safety net. I remember a specific Tuesday 3 years ago. I had just received my first significant bonus, $10,000. I was planning to use it to put a down payment on a small studio apartment in Capitol Hill. I wanted my own space, walls that I owned, a door I could lock. My father called me at work. "Ellara." His voice was tight. "We have a situation. Julian's landlord in San Francisco is being unreasonable. There was a misunderstanding about the lease, and they're threatening to evict him and seize his server equipment. He hasn't paid rent in 4 months, Dad," I said, staring at the blueprint on my desk. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a default. He's an artist, Alara. He's a visionary. He can't be bogged down by administrative minutia," my father snapped. Look, we're tapped out until the dividends clear next month. We need you to wire him 10,000. Just a loan. Family helps family. That's my down payment, Dad. Don't be selfish, he said, the word landing like a slap. You have a steady job. You have a salary. Julian is trying to change the world. Do you want your brother to be homeless? Do you want to be responsible for crushing his spirit right when he's on the verge of a breakthrough? I wired the money. I always wired the money. Because deep down, I had this pathetic, childish hope that if I was useful enough, if I was compliant enough, they would finally look at me with the same awe they reserved for him. I never bought the apartment. Julian used my $10,000 to pay off his back rent, and then he threw a launch party for a product that didn't exist, racking up another $5,000 on a credit card my mother secretly paid off. My life became a series of muted grays. I lived in a rented shoebox apartment that smelled faintly of damp wool. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic that rattled when it hit 60 miles per hour. I wore sensible clothes and ate sandwiches at my desk. To the outside world, I was boring. I was Ilara the ant, tirelessly working while the grasshopper played the fiddle. But they didn't know about the library. Every night, after my official work at Sterling and Haas was done, I worked on my own projects. I wasn't just drawing buildings. I was studying the market. I was studying real estate law. I was studying zoning codes in the wildest, most industrial parts of Seattle, the places people ignored. I learned to love the overlooked places, the resting warehouses, the abandoned factories, the forgotten lots choked with blackberries. I felt a kinship with them. They were sturdy. They had history. They were valuable, but no one could see it because they were covered in grime. I started saving aggressively. Not in the bank account my parents knew about, the one they treated like a family ATM, but in a separate, high-yield trust I had set up under an LLC. I lived on rice and beans. I walked to work to save on gas. I took freelance drafting gigs under a pseudonym for clients in Portland and Vancouver. While Julian was posting photos of his mind-expanding trips to Joshua Tree, I was buying distressed assets. My family saw me as a resource to be mined. They thought I was static. They thought I was just waiting in the wings, ready to catch Julian whenever he fell. They didn't realize that while I was holding him up, I was also building a fortress of my own. I was an architect, after all. I knew that the most important part of any structure is the part that is buried underground. The summons came on a Sunday evening. It wasn't a request. It was a calendar invite sent by my mother. Subject: family strategy meeting. Location: the house. The house was a sprawling, mid-century modern estate on Queen Anne Hill. It offered a panoramic view of the Space Needle, a view that cost millions to maintain. It was designed to impress guests, not to comfort a family. I parked my rattling Honda Civic around the block so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic of the driveway, which was occupied by my father's Tesla and a rented Porsche 911 Turbo. When I walked into the living room, the atmosphere was electric. Julian was standing in the center of the room, pacing like a tiger in a bespoke suit. He was wearing distressed jeans that cost more than my rent and a linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. "Alara, the missing piece!" Julian shouted, spreading his arms wide. He didn't hug me. He just gestured at me as if I were a prop. "Come in, grab a drink. We're making history tonight." My parents were sitting on the white leather sofa, looking at him with religious rapture. My father, Robert, held a tumbler of scotch. My mother was beaming. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," I said, taking a seat on the edge of a stiff armchair. "How was Napa?" "Forget Napa." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Listen to your brother. He's finally cracked it. This is the big one." I looked at Julian. "What is it this time? Another crypto wallet? A drone delivery service?" "Small thinking, Ilara. That's the past," Julian said, his eyes wide. "I'm talking about space." "Not outer space. Human space. The post-pandemic world is fragmented. People are lonely. They crave connection." He clicked a remote and the massive TV flared to life. A slide deck appeared. The title, in bold font, Nexus, the Cathedral of Thought. "Nexus," Julian whispered. "It's not an office. It's not an apartment. It's a lifestyle ecosystem, a membership-only club for the elite creatives of the Pacific Northwest. A place where you sleep, work, and collaborate in a seamless flow of high-end industrial design." I squinted at the screen. "It's a co-living space," I said flatly. "It is not a co-living space," Julian snapped. "It is a synergy hub." And investors are eating it up. I have soft commitments for $2 million in seed funding. But I need the physical prototype. I need the flagship location. And that, my mother said, is where you come in, Elara. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Me? Julian has found the perfect building, my father said. It's iconic, it's gritty, it's exactly the vibe the investors want. Julian pulled up a new slide. A photo of a building appeared. My heart stopped. It was the old ironworks factory in Soto, a massive red brick beast from the 1920s. It was derelict, covered in graffiti, and utterly beautiful. It's a wreck, Julian said, but the bones are incredible. High ceilings, steel beams. I want to turn it into the Nexus flagship. Glass walls, hanging gardens, a rooftop lounge. I need you to do the retrofit, Julian said, pointing at me. I need a full architectural workup. Structural analysis, interior layout, and the renders. Especially the renders. I need photorealistic 3D tours to close the Series A funding round next month. I stared at him. Julian, that is a massive project. That's 6 months of work for a team of 5. The permitting alone is a nightmare. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in architectural fees. Fees! My father laughed. Elara, don't be ridiculous. You're his sister. We're not hiring a firm. You're going to do it. I have a full-time job, I said. I work 60 hours a week. I can't just do a skyscraper-level renovation on the weekends. You're always complaining that your boss takes credit for your work. My mother interjected. Well, here is your chance to build something for your family. It's not just drawing pictures, I explained, fighting the frustration. It's liability. It's engineering. I can't stamp drawings for a project this size without a license and insurance. If something collapses, I go to jail, so use your boss's stamp, Julian said casually, or get one of your nerd friends to sign off. You figure it out. You're the detail person. Julian needs to focus on the vision, my father added. He's the CEO. He can't be bogged down with fire codes. That's your wheelhouse, Elara. You're good at the boring stuff. The boring stuff keeps the building from killing people, Dad. Stop being so dramatic, my mother sighed. Look, we've already put down the deposit for the lease option on the building. The owner is some anonymous LLC, but the broker says they're motivated. We're meeting them in 3 weeks to sign the papers. We need the preliminary drawings done by then so we can show the landlord what we intend to do. I looked at the photo of the ironworks again. You don't even have the lease yet, I asked. It's a formality, Julian waved his hand. They'd be lucky to have Nexus in there. We're going to gentrify the whole block for them. But I need those drawings, Elara, and I need them to be world-class. And what is my budget? I asked. For the design work. The room went silent. My father set his glass down hard. Your budget, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, is the roof over your head that we provided for 18 years. Your budget is the fact that we paid for your college tuition. Your budget is loyalty. We are investing everything in Julian right now. My mother added, her voice softening into a manipulative whine. Liquidity is tight until Nexus launches. We need you to pitch in. Don't be the reason your brother fails, Elara. I looked at Julian. He wasn't even looking at me anymore. He was checking his phone, smiling at a text message. He knew he would get what he wanted. He always did. Fine, I said quietly. That's my girl, my father boomed. I knew you'd come around. Now, let's open a bottle of the good stuff to celebrate Julian's launch. They poured 3 glasses of expensive champagne. They didn't pour one for me. I was driving after all. I sat there, watching them toast to a building they didn't own, celebrating a success they hadn't earned, relying on labor they wouldn't pay for. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was cold. It was calcifying. They wanted the ironworks. They wanted the boring stuff. Oh, I would give it to them. The Vanguard Design Gala is the Oscars of the Seattle architectural world. It's held at the Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum, a venue of rioting color and light. For the first time in my life, I wasn't there as a +1. I was the honoree. I had won the Emerging Visionary Award for the Rainier Spire project. It was my first step out of the shadows. I had bought an emerald green dress for the occasion, costing me 3 months of savings. I wanted to look like the architect I knew I was. I had invited my parents and Julian a month in advance. This is big, I told them. Please be there. The ceremony began at 7 p.m. At 7:15, my table was still empty. I sat alone, clutching my purse until my knuckles turned white. My boss, Mr. Sterling, sat at the adjacent table, glancing over with a mixture of pity and amusement. They arrived at 7:45, just as the appetizers were being cleared. They didn't sneak in. They made an entrance. Julian was wearing a white tuxedo jacket that made him look like a lounge singer. My mother was in dripping sequins. We're here. We made it, Julian announced, pulling out a chair loudly. God, parking is a nightmare. Elara, why did you pick a venue with no valet? I didn't pick the venue, Julian. It's the gala, I whispered. You're 45 minutes late. Fashionably late, my mother corrected. Oh, look at you.
That green is gold. We're here now, my father said, signaling a waiter. So, when do you get your little plaque? It's a crystal obelisk, and it's in 10 minutes. I tried to focus.
I tried to explain who was in the room, urban planners, venture capitalists. Julian's ears perked up at venture capital, but I hissed at him to let this night be about me. When the master of ceremonies called my name, the applause was polite. I walked up to the podium, my heart hammering. I took the heavy award and leaned into the microphone. Thank you, I began. Architecture is often seen as the creation of objects, but I believe it is the creation of relationships between people and their environment. When I designed I never finished the sentence. From the table right in front of the stage, there was the sound of a chair scraping loudly. Here, here, Julian's voice rang out. The audience turned. Julian was standing up, raising his champagne glass. He wasn't drunk. He was calculating. Sorry to interrupt, sis, he said, flashing a charming smile to the confused crowd. But I just have to say, I am so incredibly proud of my baby sister. Isn't she amazing? A few people clapped awkwardly. Alara is a genius, Julian continued, walking toward the stage. He was coming up the stairs. She has always been the one with the pencils, the one with the discipline. And that is exactly why I chose her. He was standing next to me now. He put his arm around my shoulder, squeezing tight. I felt like a prop. You see, Julian addressed the room. Alara's award tonight is just the beginning. It is the validation of the team we are building. I am thrilled to announce right here that Alara is going to be the lead technical architect for the most ambitious project Seattle has seen in a decade. My father stood up in the audience, clapping slowly. Nexus! Julian shouted. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a USB drive, and handed it to the confused AV technician. Run it, it's queued up. Suddenly, the screens behind me, the screens that were supposed to be showing my portfolio, flickered and changed. There, in high-definition 4K resolution, were the renderings I had stayed up for 3 weeks straight to create. The renderings of the old Ironworks factory. The exposed brick, the hanging gardens, the glowing Nexus sign. They were beautiful, and they were stolen. This is the old Ironworks in Soto, Julia narrated, blocking me from view. We are reclaiming the industrial soul of this city, and with Alara's technical skills executing my creative vision, Nexus will launch this fall. He turned to look at me, smiling that shark-like smile. I couldn't build my dream without my little helper. Give it up for Alara, folks, the first employee of Nexus. The room applauded. They didn't know the truth. They thought this was a touching sibling moment. They didn't hear the diminutive phrasing. Technical skills. Helper. He had reduced me to a subordinate in my own moment of glory. He had announced a project on a building we didn't own, using work I hadn't been paid for. My mother was beaming, mouthing, "Good job," to Julian. I stood there, holding my heavy crystal obelisk. It felt like a weapon. Julian whispered to me off mic, "You're welcome. I just got you more exposure in 5 minutes than you've had in 5 years. You don't own that building, Julian," I whispered back. "Details," he scoffed. "We signed the lease on Friday. It's a done deal." He walked off stage to thunderous applause. I was left standing there, alone in the spotlight, holding an award that suddenly felt like a participation trophy. In that moment, something inside me snapped, but it wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a structural cable giving way deep inside a suspension bridge. They thought the Ironworks was theirs. They thought I was theirs. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I walked off the stage. I didn't go to the bar. I walked straight out the back door, into the cool, rainy Seattle night. I pulled my phone out. I dialed a number I had memorized 3 years ago. "Hello?" a voice answered. It was a property management lawyer, my contact. "Hi, David," I said, my voice steady as the concrete under my feet. "It's Alara, regarding the Ironworks property held in the trust. I need you to prepare the lease rejection documents. And bring the cease and desist order for trademark infringement. You want to serve them?" David asked. "I thought you were waiting for the right time." I looked back at the glowing glass museum, where my brother was currently selling shares of a castle built on sand. "The time is right," I said. "Set the meeting for Friday." The 3 days between the gala and the Friday meeting were a study in human delusion. My phone blew up with texts from my mother. Not apologies for hijacking my award moment, but commands. "We need the blueprints printed on A1 bond paper for the Friday meeting. Julian wants them rolled, not folded, and wear something professional. You're representing the family." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was busy representing myself. They call it asymmetric warfare. It's when one side has nuclear capabilities and the other side is fighting with sticks and stones, but the side with the sticks thinks they are winning because they are making more noise. My family thought I was the girl with the Honda Civic in the studio apartment. They looked at my thrift store blazers and my brown bag lunches and assumed I was destitute. They assumed that because I didn't flaunt wealth, I didn't possess it. They forgot the one person in our family who actually saw me, my great-aunt Rose. Rose was the black sheep of the Vance family. She was a spinster who lived in a clutter-filled house in Ballard, surrounded by cats and stacks of old Scientific American magazines. When I was a teenager, while Julian was at football camp or acting classes, I would go to Rose's house. We would drink tea, and she would teach me how to read stock tickers and municipal zoning maps. She was a savant with numbers. When she died 6 years ago, she left a modest estate. My parents expected a windfall. Instead, they got her house, which was mortgaged to the hilt, and a collection of ceramic figurines. They were furious, but Rose had left me something separate, a small life insurance policy, paid out directly to me, bypassing the estate. It was $45,000. To my parents, $45,000 was a week in Saint-Tropez. To Julian, it was the seed money for an app that tracks artisan water fountains. To me, it was leverage. I didn't spend it. I leveraged it. I was 22, fresh out of architecture school, and obsessed with the Soto district, south of downtown. Back then, it was an industrial wasteland of potholes and heroin needles, but I had read the city's 2030 comprehensive plan. I knew the light rail was expanding. I knew the zoning was about to flip from industrial to mixed-use commercial. I found the ironworks. It was a foreclosure. The previous owner had gone bankrupt remediating the soil. The bank wanted it off their books. It was listed for a price that was laughable for a city like Seattle, but no one touched it because it was ugly, toxic, and in the middle of nowhere. I created an LLC. I named it Oculus Holdings. I put my $45,000 down as a deposit and secured a hard money loan for the rest, using the projected post-zoning value as collateral. It was a terrifying financial risk. For 2 years, I ate ramen noodles and walked to work because every spare dime went to paying the interest and the property taxes. I spent my weekends there, not partying, but cleaning. I learned how to sandblast brick. I learned how to repair century-old window sashes. I fell in love with that building. It was my sanctuary. It was the one thing in the world that was mine, and mine alone. And then the market turned. Amazon expanded. Google built a campus nearby. The zoning changed, just as I predicted. The value of the ironworks skyrocketed. I refinanced, paid off the hard money loan, and suddenly, I was sitting on an asset worth $4 million. But I never told them. Why would I? If they knew I had money, the guilt trips would start. Julian needs a bridge loan. Mom needs a new car. We're a family, Alara. Share the wealth. So I stayed to ghost. I let them pay for dinner when we went out, enduring their comments about how I should order the chicken to save money. I let them pity me. Pity is a fantastic camouflage, but the building wasn't my only weapon. There was the intellectual property. When Julian projected my designs onto the screen at the gala, he made a fatal legal error. He wasn't my employer. Nexus wasn't my employer. We had no contract. I had signed no waiver. In the United States, copyright for architectural works attaches the moment the work is created in a fixed medium. Those renderings, those floor plans, the branding aesthetic of Nexus, they belong to me. By announcing to the world that he was using these specific designs for his commercial venture, and by soliciting investment based on them, he had walked right into a federal copyright trap. On Thursday afternoon, I sat in the office of David Thorne, my attorney. David was a shark in a bespoke suit, the kind of lawyer who enjoyed destroying arrogant men. He had been managing Oculus Holdings for me for years. Let me get this straight, David said, leaning back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. Your brother is trying to lease your building, to build a business based on your stolen designs, using money he doesn't have, and he wants you to attend the lease signing as his, what, technical assistant? Exactly, I said, sliding a folder across the desk. And he has no idea you are Oculus Holdings. None. He thinks Oculus is some faceless investment group from Vancouver. David opened the folder. Inside were the lease documents Julian's team had prepared. They were insulting. They asked for 6 months of free rent, a tenant improvement allowance of $2 million, and a clause that allowed them to break the lease if the startup failed. This is garbage, David laughed. No landlord in Seattle would sign this. I know, I said, but we're going to let him think we might. And the IP? Here is the registration, I said, handing him a second document. Registered with the Library of Congress 3 weeks ago, right after he first mentioned the project to me. I knew he'd try to steal it. David whistled low. Alara, you're cold. I'm structural, I corrected him. I calculate loads and failures. So, what's the play for tomorrow? David asked. We go to the meeting, I said, staring out the window at the Rady skyline. My parents and Julian will be there to bully the landlord's representative into signing this terrible lease. You will be the representative. And you? I'll be sitting on their side of the table, I said. Until I'm not. I felt a strange coldness settle over me. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling of a demolition expert pressing the button. The charges were set. The wires were connected. The building was evacuated. My family thought the ironworks was their future. They thought Nexus was their ticket to the billionaire class. They were already spending the money in their heads. My mother was looking at vacation homes in Aspen. Julian was looking at Ferraris. They were about to hit a wall of reinforced concrete at 100 miles an hour. I checked my bank account on my phone. The balance in my personal checking account, the one they knew about, was $1,200. The balance in the Oculus Holdings operating account was significant. I was the landlord, I was the architect, I was the artist, and tomorrow, I was the executioner. The conference room at Thorne & Associates was designed to intimidate. It was on the 42nd floor of the Columbia Center, the tallest building in Seattle. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a view of the city drowning in a gray wash of rain. The table was a slab of black marble, cold and unyielding. My family arrived 15 minutes late. I was already there, sitting in one of the side chairs against the wall, not at the main table. I had positioned myself intentionally, the dutiful sister, the assistant, the detail person ready to take notes. When Julian walked in, he didn't even say hello to me. He threw his wet trench coat at me. Hang that up, would you, Alara? And see if you can find some sparkling water. My throat is dry from pitching to the Angels this morning. I caught the coat. It was heavy and smelled of expensive cologne and damp wool. I hung it up. I didn't get the water. My father, Robert, strode to the head of the table and sat down, spreading his arms as if he owned the firm. Nice view, he grunted. Though the decor is a bit sterile, we'll do better with the Nexus HQ. My mother, Catherine, was nervously checking her reflection in the glass. Do I look all right? We need to charm this representative. Julian, remember to smile. Use your teeth. I've got this, Mom, Julian said, drumming his fingers on the marble. These corporate types are all the same. They just want to hear that they're part of the next big thing. Once I show him the pre-sale numbers, he'll be begging us to sign the lease. The door opened, and David Thorne walked in. David is 6'4", wears three-piece suits, and has a face carved out of granite. He didn't smile. He carried a thick leather portfolio. He didn't look at me. Good afternoon, David said, his voice a deep baritone that instantly sucked the air out of the room. I am David Thorne, legal counsel for Oculus Holdings. David, good to meet you, my father said, standing up to shake his hand. David accepted the handshake briefly, then sat down at the opposite end of the table. Let's get right to it, David said, opening a file. You are here to propose a lease agreement for the property located at 1402 Industrial Way, formerly the Ironworks. We're here to offer you a partnership, Julian corrected him, leaning forward with his practiced visionary intensity. We aren't just tenants, we are activators. We are going to take that rotting pile of bricks and turn it into the heartbeat of Seattle's creative economy. The lease terms we sent over reflect that value add. David looked down at the paper. The terms you sent over request 24 months of rent abatement, a $3 million build-out allowance funded by the landlord, and an equity stake in Nexus in lieu of a security deposit. David looked up over his reading glasses. To be blunt, Mr. Vance, this is not a lease. This is a donation request. You're looking at the numbers, not the potential, Julian argued, his voice rising. Nexus is going to be a unicorn. The equity we're offering will be worth 10 times the rent in 5 years. Oculus Holdings is a real estate asset management firm, David said deeply. We deal in rent, not lottery tickets. Look, my father interjected, his tone turning aggressive. We know the building has been sitting empty. You're bleeding property taxes on it. We are your only option. If you don't sign with us, that place rots for another decade. So let's stop the postering. Who is the principal? Who is the actual owner? I want to talk to them, not a lawyer. David paused. He closed the file. He clasped his hands on the table. The principal is present, David said. My father looked around the room, confused. What? Where? The sole proprietor of Oculus Holdings, David said, looking directly at me for the first time, is Miss Alara Vance. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical pressure, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado touches down. Julian turned his head slowly to look at me. He blinked, once, twice, He looked like a computer trying to process a command that didn't exist in its code. Elara? He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. What is he talking about, Elara? Tell him to stop joking. I stood up. I walked over to the main table. I didn't look at Julian. I walked to the head of the table, opposite David. I pulled out the heavy leather chair and sat down. Hello, Julian, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and terrifyingly polite. Hello, Mother, Father. You own the ironworks, my mother whispered, her hand flying to her throat. But Tao, you drive a Honda. I bought it 6 years ago, I said, with the money Aunt Rose left me. The money you didn't know about because you were too busy trying to raid her estate for antiques. You own it. My father stammered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. You own the building we've been pitching to investors for 3 months? Yes, I said, and as the landlord I have reviewed your proposal. I picked up the lease document Julian had prepared, the one asking for millions in freebies. I held it up for a moment, letting them see it. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I tore it in half. I dropped the pieces on the table. The answer is no, I said. No? Julian stood up, slamming his hands on the table. You can't say no! I've already taken deposits! I've promised the investors a flagship location. If I don't have this building, the seed round collapses! That sounds like a you problem, Julian, I said. Not a landlord problem. We are family, my mother shrieked. Elara, stop this madness right now. You own the building? Fine. Wonderful. That makes this easier. You can just sign the building over to the company, and we can keep it in the family. We'll give you shares. I don't want shares in a shell company, Mom, I said. And we aren't done. I nodded to David. David pulled a thick stack of documents from his portfolio and slid them across the marble table toward Julian. They hit the surface with a heavy thud. What is this? Julian asked, staring at the cover page. That, I said, is a cease and desist order regarding the intellectual property of Nexus. The what? The renderings, I said, leaning forward. The floor plans. The logo. The aesthetic design you projected onto the screen at the gala. The designs you have been emailing to venture capitalists to solicit money. I told you to draw those. Julian shouted. You did them for me. I did them, I corrected. I created them. And since there was no employment contract, no payment, and no assignment of rights, under United States copyright law, I own them. I registered them with the Library of Congress 3 weeks ago. Julian's face went pale. He knew enough about business to know what this meant. You are currently soliciting investment using stolen intellectual property, I continued, my voice cutting like a scalpel. That is fraud, Julian. Federal fraud. David chimed in, his voice like a closing coffin lid. We are demanding the immediate removal of all Oculus-owned imagery from your pitch decks, website, and social media. Furthermore, we are preparing a civil suit for damages regarding the unauthorized use of Ms. Vance's professional work to secure capital. If you do not comply within 24 hours, we will contact your investors directly to inform them of the litigation. You would destroy your brother? My father whispered, staring at me with genuine horror. You would burn down his future? I didn't burn anything, Dad, I said. I just refused to be the fuel. Elara, please, my mother started crying, the tears instantaneous and weaponized. He's your brother. He's special. He needs this. Just sign the lease. Just let him use the drawings. What do you want? Money? We can pay you when the funding clears. I don't want your money, I said, standing up. I have my own. I looked at Julian. He looked small. The visionary was gone. He was just a man in a wet coat who had forgotten to pay the one person who held up his sky. The meeting is over, I said. Security will escort you out. You're enjoying this, Julian spat, his eyes filled with hate. You jealous little bitch. You're just jealous that I have the spark and you're nothing but a calculator. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, his words didn't hurt. They just bounced off the concrete. I'm not a calculator, Julian, I said softly. I'm the architect. And I just condemned your building. I turned my back on them and walked toward the window, watching the rain wash the city clean. Behind me, David was already calling security. The explosion wasn't physical, but the shockwave was enough to rattle the glass walls of the conference room. For the first minute, it was just noise, a cacophony of 3 distinct frequencies of panic. My father's voice was a low, thundering bass, shouting about betrayal and ungrateful children. My mother's voice was a piercing treble, a high-pitched wail that sounded like metal shearing under stress. Julian's voice was a jagged static, spitting out legal threats he didn't understand and insults that no longer landed. I sat there, my hands folded on the cool black marble, and I watched them. It was a strange sensation. For my entire life, these voices had been the command codes of my existence. When my father shouted, I shrank. When my mother cried, I crumbled. When Julian demanded I served. Their frequencies had always vibrated through my bones, controlling my movements like a marionette. But now, nothing. It was as if I was watching a video with the audio desynchronated. I saw my father's face turning a mottled purple, his veins bulging in his neck. I saw my mother clutching her pearls, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks like cracks in a porcelain mask. I saw Julian pacing, throwing his hands up, pointing at me, pointing at David, pointing at the ceiling. I looked at David. He was sitting perfectly still, his face a mask of professional boredom. He checked his watch. He had seen this before. He knew that extinction bursts are always the loudest right before the end. Alara! My father slammed his hand on the table, the vibration traveling through the marble to my fingertips. The physical sensation snapped the audio back into focus for a brief second. Are you listening to me? You are going to fix this, right now. You are going to sign that lease, and you are going to sign over the rights to the designs, or so help me God, you are no daughter of mine. That's the point, isn't it? I said. My voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it cut through their wall of noise like a diamond cutter. What did you say? He seethed. You said I'm no daughter of yours, I repeated, looking him in the eye. I think we established that years ago. I wasn't a daughter, I was an asset. I was an insurance policy against Julian's inevitable failures. We gave you everything, my mother screamed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked. We paid for your school. We put a roof over your head. And I have calculated the debt, I said. I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a tissue. I didn't pull out a peace offering. I pulled out a cashier's check. I had prepared it that morning. It was the final structural reinforcement of my new life. I slid the check across the table. It spun slowly on the smooth surface and came to a stop in front of my father. He looked down at it. What is this? He asked, his voice trembling. $82,400.50, I recited. That is the exact cost of my tuition at the University of Washington, adjusted for inflation, plus the interest on the loans you took out. It also includes an estimated sum for room and board during the 2 years I lived at home after graduation. My mother stared at the check as if it were a live grenade. You're paying us back. I'm buying you out, I said, like a hostile takeover. We don't want your money, Julian shouted, snatching the check. We want the building. We want the IP. We want the future you stole from me. I didn't steal your future, Julian, I said, standing up slowly. I just stopped building it for you. I looked around the room. The rain was hammering harder against the windows now, blurring the city outside into a watercolor smear of grays and blues. The world felt vast and liquid. This check clears the ledger, I said, addressing them as a collective entity. I owe you nothing. And more importantly, you owe nothing of me. Not my work, not my time, not my guilt. David cleared his throat and slid one final document across the table. This, David said, is a formal notice of estrangement. It outlines the boundaries of future contact, specifically that there will be none. Any attempts to contact Miss Vance at her place of employment, her residence, or via digital means will be considered harassment and will be met with an immediate restraining order. The security downstairs has been instructed to ban you from the building. The locks on the ironworks have already been changed. My parents looked at the paper, then at me. The reality was finally setting in. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an eviction. My mother stopped crying. Her face went cold, the mask slipping back into place. If you walk out that door, Alara, she hissed, her voice venomous and low, don't you ever come back. When you fail, and you will fail, because you have no charisma, no soul, don't come crawling back to us. You will be alone. I looked at her. I remembered being 7 years old, drawing houses in the dirt, waiting for her to look at me. I remembered being 16, getting straight A's, waiting for her to praise me. I remembered being 28, standing on a stage, waiting for her to defend me. She was right. I had been alone for a long time. The difference was, now I liked the company. I'm not afraid of being alone, Mother, I said. I'm afraid of being surrounded by people who make me feel lonely. I turned to David. I think we're done here. Agreed, David said, closing his portfolio. I turned my back on them. Elara, Julian screamed. Elara, wait! We can work something out. 10% equity, 20%. Just don't kill the deal. I walked toward the glass door. Elara, my father roared. I reached for the handle. As my hand touched the cold metal, I did something I had practiced in my head 1,000 times. I imagined a heavy steel blast door slamming shut between me and them. I imagined the seal locking tight. I imagined the airlock depressurizing. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway. The sound of their voices followed me for a second, shouting, pleading, cursing, but then the heavy glass door swung shut on its hydraulic hinges. Click. The sound cut off instantly. I stood in the hallway for a moment looking back through the glass. It was soundproof. High-grade, acoustic-dampening architectural glass. I watched them. My father was red-faced, his mouth opening and closing in a silent roar. My mother was shaking Julian by the shoulders. Julian was throwing the torn lease papers into the air like confetti. They looked like fish in an aquarium. Frantic, trapped, and completely silent. They were performing a play for an audience of 0. I felt a strange pressure release in my ears, like coming down from a high altitude. The tightness in my chest, a tightness I had carried since I was a child, simply evaporated. I turned away from the aquarium. I walked down the long, silent corridor to the elevators. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The descent was smooth. I watched the floor numbers count down. 42, 35, 15, L. The lobby was bustling with people rushing to get out of the rain or get into the warmth. The ordinary chaos of the city. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The Seattle rain was falling in sheets, cold and clean. I didn't open my umbrella. I let the water hit my face. It felt real. It felt like concrete curing. It felt permanent. I looked south, toward Soto, toward the ironworks. It was just a building. Bricks, mortar, steel, and glass. It wasn't a revenge plot anymore. It wasn't a weapon. It was just a structure. And I was the architect. I could turn it into a studio. I could turn it into a shelter. I could sell it and move to Paris. I could do anything, because the blueprints were finally mine. I took a deep breath, tasting the ozone in the wet pavement. The silence inside my head was vast and beautiful. It wasn't empty. It was spacious. It was room to build. I began to walk, my heels clicking rhythmically on the wet sidewalk, a steady, solitary drumbeat marching into a quiet future.